So yes, we are at the Haftorah for the Torah portion, Ki Tetzeh. And the last three chapters, Isaiah's words have focused on God's mission of salvation and redemption of Israel. The agent that will accomplish this on behalf of God is variously called the arm of the Lord or the servant, this divine entity. He works in the life of Israel according to God's will. The arm of the Lord is very ancient. He visited Abraham. He redeemed Israel from bondage to Pharaoh. He parted the waters. He led them through and protected before them and after them. In Isaiah 53, we hear how the revealed arm of the Lord must be brutalized and die and then resurrect in order to accomplish a critical task, the task of removing the guilt of Zion, Jerusalem, Israel, and anyone who will, as it says, believe our report, so that the plan of redemption may progress. Those chapters from Isaiah clearly make a connection between the arm of the Lord and the suffering servant. I've been touching on this point repeatedly this year, and I hope that you're now able to see that the crushing of Jerusalem and the temple was in sight for Yeshua, and how he saw his painful crucifixion and death as directly parallel to the siege and the destruction of God's holy city. And therefore, we must conclude that the resurrection of Yeshua, 3 days later, is therefore parallel to life from the dead for this crushed city. And I hope to once again today show how the words of Isaiah are related directly to Yeshua and his mission, not only to save individual souls of all mankind, but also specifically to restore Jerusalem, Israel, and the people to the land. In my sermon last week, I used the imagery of waves, the surf, to describe the varying voices that arise out of Isaiah. You know, ask any surfer or an oceanographer, and they'll tell you that waves tend to come in triplets. They sit out there waiting for the waves to come in, and they come in threes. Groups of 3 waves tend to come, followed by a brief period of rest, then 3 more. The voices of the entities in Isaiah also seem to come in threes. Zion, Jerusalem, Israel, as well as Adonai, the arm of the Lord, and the servant. But wave patterns are very complex, varying in intensity and character. Now foaming, now curling, now murmuring, then catching the light of the sunset or glinting with the brilliance of the noonday sun. Often, other elements are carried along on these waves. In this way, we see other elements reflecting out of the waves of the surf as the temple, things such as the temple reflecting out, the tabernacle, the wilderness reflecting out, the children of Israel, and of course the pinnacle of the divine nature and the purpose of the brilliant light of the salvation and justice of the Lord, all glimmering off of these waves, coming through the voice of Yeshua. The element we will hear in the waves today, in today's Haftorah, includes these elements of marriage and childbirth and the household, speaking in terms of tents, as well as covenantal renewal. To connect with our previous imagery, the renewed life of Jerusalem from the rubble of destruction and the exile of her children is the underpinning of the imagery used by Isaiah, including marriage, rebirth, repopulation of the city, and restoration of the covenant. That's the underpinning. Therefore, in Isaiah chapter 54, Isaiah shifts his attention back to the holy city once again as a bride and a mother. And as we proceed to talk today, we'll refer back to these various statements of Isaiah, but there's a picture I wanted to share with you. Could you cue up that slide? I want you to see that picture. This is a picture from a Yemenite Jewish wedding. The Yemenite Jews maintain some of the most ancient and beautiful rites in all of Judaism. The Yemenite henna ceremony, which is the preparing of the bride, even today carries with it ancient Jewish wedding traditions that would have been recognizable to those that wrote the Torah, to the pre-exilic Jews. Lots of food and dancing with the accompaniment of percussion instruments. When Isaiah uses the phrase, deck yourself like a bride, it's very similar to this. It's what he's talking about. You can turn that off. We'll see it again later. So this Torah portion. Sing, O barren one, who has not given birth. Burst into singing and shout, you who have not travailed. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married one, says Adonai. This is a beautiful way to enter into this, and this imagery of the bride and the mother. But I believe to truly get the force of this verse, we must grab a hold of three more statements that are found elsewhere in Isaiah. Back in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 14, Zion's voice rose out of the prophet, and it said, the Lord has forsaken me. The Lord has forgot me. This is the voice of a bereaved wife who feels abandoned by her husband, unable to fulfill the imperative to have children. Then in verse 17 of that same book, swiftly your children are coming to you, it says. It's this comforting thing. Don't worry, swiftly, your children are coming. And then finally, in verse 20 of chapter 49, it says to Zion, the children you thought you had lost shall yet say in your hearing, the place is too crowded for me. Make room for me to dwell. The sudden arrival of the lost children is astonishing in its scope. And so the servant goes on to tell poor Zion in verse 21 of chapter 49 what her likely reaction will be. You will say to yourself, who bore these for me when I was bereaved and barren, exiled and disdained? By whom were these reared? I was left alone. And where have these been? You see this amazing restoration that's happened even in our lifetime. It's the theme for chapter 49, and it comes once again on the waves of this prophetic tide in Isaiah in chapter 54. He says, sing, O barren one who has not given birth. Burst into singing and shout, you who have not travailed. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married one. You see, the echo of the bereaved Zion from chapter 49 is once again being addressed in this. And it will return again in a future chapter. We'll see at the very end of the book of Isaiah that this theme will come to its fullest expression in Isaiah chapter 66, verses 7 through 8. Before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came, she delivered a male child. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such a thing? Can a land be born in one day? Can a nation be brought forth at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children. Please note what this is all talking about. This is the restoration of Jerusalem. This is the regathering of the exiles. This is the founding of the state of Israel, all of which happened in our lives. All of this regathering, the children coming home, it's happening right now. The echo. Because they keep saying this over and over in Isaiah, it's important to note that we've heard this message in Isaiah 49, in Isaiah 54, and in Isaiah 66. They converge to give a threefold prophetic picture, which says that no matter the tragic history of Jerusalem, no matter the exile of the children of Jacob, no matter what you see going on in the world today, with the vast anti-Semitism and hatred arising in the world and all the nations coming against her, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. No matter what, it will be restored. Humanity can't get in the way of that. It's a threefold prophetic promise, and all things, remember, in the Torah must be determined by 2 or 3 witnesses. Here's at least 3. This promise has not been superseded, nor replaced, nor abolished. The consolation of Israel is, as McLaughlin used to say, a metaphysical certainty. If anyone caught that, that means you're old. Just listen to the repeated voices in their imagery. And now here today in Isaiah 54, the consolation of Israel is expanded in this vision of restoration of the sacred marriage. The prophet proceeds with the theme. He says, enlarge the place of your tent, stretch out your tabernacle curtains, do not hold back, lengthen your cords, strengthen your stakes. That's from the Tree of Life version. That's how they translated it. It says in Hebrew, Harchivi mekom Elohecha ve'irot mishkanotayik yatu. Enlarge the place of your tent and stretch out your cloths. The TLV makes note of something very important here by their translation. It emphasizes the connection to the wilderness tabernacle. This word, yiriot, is the same word used in the commands for the construction of the tabernacle. That is, the cloths that were used to make the Mishkan. And keep this in mind, the wilderness tabernacle was built after the heavenly pattern was shown to Moses. So what is the heavenly pattern then that we make the connection to? He saw the heavenly Jerusalem, and that's how the tabernacle is designed. So this adds a new adornment to Isaiah's words. By adding the imagery of the tabernacle, he's brought this element into the picture of restoration. It could be simultaneously looked at in 2 ways. The tabernacle, remember, was the center of the camp where the glory of Adonai was seen continually as a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So one way to look at this is that this reference to the tabernacle cloths means that this restoration of Israel isn't just going to be a physical restoration. It's not just rebuilding the city. It's not just gathering the children. It's a spiritual renewal. Hence, he uses the center of spirituality, the tabernacle, as the text. Another way to look at it is that it expands the idea of the Abrahamic promise that will be amplified in these end days. The children will be so numerous that Jerusalem and the entire land of Israel will be overcrowded and will need to expand. That little promise to Abraham, your children will be as uncountable as the stars. All the land that has been lost to the other nations over the millennia will be regained. Even those lands on the east side of the Jordan. Even the land stretching north towards Damascus will be restored. The Abrahamic promise, renewed and restored, then also is amplified in this way. It implies that all the families of the world will be blessed in this restoration. The restoration of Israel is the restoration of all mankind. The verse says that they should not hold back. Go into it wholeheartedly. Pour yourself into it. You'll have to expand these cloths to accommodate both the spiritual renewal and the physical overcrowding. Make firm and strengthen the cords. Make firm the stakes. That is, rebuild the spiritual house of Israel and the physical house of Israel on the firm foundation. What is that firm foundation? Yeshua, I heard it. The implication here is that the children who enter this Mishkan, or restored faith of Israel and restored land of Israel, will be more numerous than we could ever imagine. Tiny Eretz Israel will soon be too small. Now you'll need to expand your tent in order to house them. Don't stint, drive your pegs firm. Establish it in the land. We may take this as God's emphatic support for the reestablishment of Israel in all the land that was promised to Abraham. Recently, Netanyahu made reference to that, and half the world shook in fear. Who is man that he should tell the sovereign God where his chosen can and cannot live? Israel will be enlarged, not to 67 lines, not to 48 lines, but to the lines mentioned in the covenant between Abraham and God, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. But now that we have mentioned Abraham, I'd like to draw your attention to another verse that we heard recently, back in Isaiah 51. It said, "Listen to me, you who pursue justice, you who seek Adonai. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, to the quarry from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you. For when I called him, he was but one. Then I blessed him and multiplied him." We've been talking here about brides being adorned and wives giving birth. In this verse, we hear that Abraham is the rock from which we were hewn, and that Sarah is the one who bore you. Sometimes I think Sarah gets really short shrift in all of the studies of the Bible that I hear. We never forget that the holy people arose from her womb. Abraham, the father, sired Isaac, the son. But Isaac was born of Sarah. From the line of Isaac, Jacob would arise. From the line of Jacob, ultimately the suffering servant would arise. The servant who would be divinely conceived, and similarly, there was divine intercession in the conception of Isaac. Just as Isaac was willing to be the lamb on the altar, the servant would give himself up actually as the lamb for slaughter. Sarah was the mother who started it all. As we listen to the waves coming in of Isaiah's message, carrying all of these elements into their rhythmic time, we hear her echoes once again. Shout, O barren one who bore no child. Let's ask ourselves, who was the first barren one who bore no children? Who was grieved because she could bear no children? That was, of course, Sarah. So now we see that Sarah is the archetype of the barren one who bore no children until God intervened. Over the last several weeks, we've seen that Zion, Jerusalem, is the one forlorn, the one barren without children. Now we can add Sarah into that triad imagery. Zion, Jerusalem, and Sarah all coalesce into one thought in the voice that arises out of Isaiah. Zion, Jerusalem, Sarah has been subjugated when the leadership of the nation went astray. First, Assyria got as far as her walls. Then Babylon actually took her into his empire. Then the Medes took over, followed by the Persians, who were themselves superseded by the Greeks, and finally the Romans. Each time, you could say that Jerusalem was taken into the harem of nations that were taken as spoils of war by these empires. Her once great glory, epitomized in the reign of David, was the high point of her memory, but then, after that, subsequent history brought her shame by her being taken into these harems. The scriptural parallel, of course, to these disgraces are the disgraces suffered by Sarah. She was taken into the harem of Pharaoh, but God intervened and she was released. Then into the harem of Abimelech, and once again God intervened and she was released. Each time she might have felt like a widow separated from her husband. But through God's faithfulness and his miraculous interventions, she was finally restored to her true husband. Sarah's fate predicted the fate of Jerusalem. Thus, Sarah is the archetype of Jerusalem, and she is in view when the divine voice speaks through the prophet in verse 4 of Isaiah 54. Fear not, for you will not be ashamed, nor cringe, for you will not be disgraced. For you will forget the shame of your youth and you will remember the approach of your widowhood no more. And now the divine voice seems to have Sarah and Jerusalem and Israel in view when he says in 54:5, for your maker is your husband. Adonai Tsevaot is his name. The Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. He will be called God of all the earth. Now the narration begins to speak of the marriage of God to his bride, Zion, Jerusalem, Israel. In our title view of this narrative, we need to see that Sarah has been in the background of the sound of these waves all along. This is because we need to understand that her life story was bound up in the history of God's chosen people and his chosen city. Now we will look to the sweetness of the bonds which God has for his bride. Isaiah 54:6, for Adonai has called you back like a wife deserted and grieved in spirit, like a wife of one's youth that is rejected, says your God. This is the voice of consolation. Now God is calling her back. In previous texts, we saw how the ruined city lay forlorn and abandoned, a pile of rubble. And the gospel texts tell us of the 3 days that Yeshua also lay as if dead and forsaken. But his rising to life was precursor to the rising to life of the holy city. Now, the resurrection of Zion is entwined with the renewal of that loving relationship that we've just heard about. The husband who is her maker is calling her back. The wife who felt deserted was grieved in spirit like a wife of one's youth that is rejected. The trampling by the Gentile nations from Egypt to Assyria to Babylon to Greece to Rome, there's no shortage of history of the holy city suffering just as Sarah suffered in her times, in all those harems. But now God has called her back. Her husband has said once again, return to me. And now her husband actually confesses. Yeah, God actually confesses in here. God loves his bride so much that he gives her an explanation of what's going on, even though he doesn't owe an explanation. But he did it out of pure grace. He says in verses 7-8, for a brief moment I deserted you, but I will regather you with great compassion. In a surge of anger, I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting kindness, I will have compassion on you, says Adonai, your Redeemer. Could we see that picture again? That's what those words depict. The loving husband back with his bride, comforting her. Keep Jerusalem in view when you read these verses. There are two things to remember here. One, in Isaiah 50, verse 1, the divine husband asks rhetorically, where is your bill of divorce? In other words, there isn't one. And in Ezekiel chapter 11, Ezekiel actually got to watch the glory leave Jerusalem. Well, it left Jerusalem, but where did it go? It followed the children into exile. Never left her. Never actually left her. God didn't abandon his people, but the city lay empty for a time as if she was a wife divorced and abandoned. But she actually was not divorced nor abandoned. There is a unilateral, unbreakable bond between God and his bride, his city, his land, and his people. Therefore, the divine husband's voice shifts to covenant language in verse 9. For this is like the waters of Noah to me. For as I swore that the waters of Noah should no more cover the earth, so I have sworn that I will not be angry with you, nor will I rebuke you. He compares his faithfulness with the faithfulness he has shown in the Noachic covenant to all mankind. I swore the waters of Noah should no more cover the earth. I have sworn that I will not be angry with you. When God swears something, it's true. So now the language of Isaiah has connected the covenant with Israel to the covenant with all mankind. This restoration of Israel is to the benefit of all mankind. Isaiah 54:10, the final verse of the Haftorah. Though the mountains depart and the hills be shaken, my love will not depart from you, nor will my covenant of peace be shaken, says Adonai, who has compassion on you. Suddenly, we have another sound in the surging tide, the promise of the covenant of shalom, Brit Shalom. It's engulfed within the many sounds of the waves continually surging with his love, which never departs. Just as the floods of his wrath never returned, neither can God's love ever depart from us. We first encounter this covenant of shalom in Numbers 25:12 when Pinchas skewered Zimri and Cosbi and all the events of Baal Peor. His zeal won for the Levite tribe a covenant of shalom. But it's not the only covenant of shalom that's mentioned in Scripture. One very significant one occurs in Ezekiel chapter 37. For all you Bible buffs out there, you were probably already paying attention. That's the dry bones chapter, dealing with the resurrection of Israel. A theme similar to the one that we've been looking at from the perspective of Zion coming to life after being a destroyed city. After the prophecy of the dry bones and after the prophecy about unification of the nation of Israel, Ezekiel says, starting at verse 25, they will live in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, where your ancestors lived. They will live there. They, their children, and their children's children forever, and my servant David will be their prince forever. I will cut a covenant of shalom with them. It will be an everlasting covenant with them. So this is an eternal covenant of shalom. I will give to them and multiply them. I will set up my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be over them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations will know that I am Adonai, who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forever. It's a sign to all the world. When God restores Jerusalem, when once again the sanctuary is there among them, this is a sign for all the world. We haven't quite got there yet, have we? Now we have a wonderful connection here between the promise found in Isaiah and the promises of Ezekiel, this covenant of shalom, which is eternal. Notice that Ezekiel ties it to my servant David. And God has shown how this covenant of shalom will affect all the world. Isaiah's prophecy of the covenant of shalom has brought yet another sound in these wonderful waves of prophecy that he's been speaking. The servant, the son of David, now the eternal prince of Israel. The mother, the wife, the children, Jerusalem, Zion, the exiled children of Jacob, and the salvation of all the nations of the earth. All of this mixed up in the prophecy of Isaiah, all of it roaring over the beautiful sound of the waves of love and the covenant of shalom. The covenant of shalom was ratified by the blood of Yeshua, who we know clearly is the suffering servant of Isaiah 53. Matthew 26:27-29 says, and he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the removal of sins. This is the heavenly and eternal covenant of peace in the blood of Messiah, which is anchored in the heavenly Jerusalem, the land of Israel, the people of Israel, and all mankind who will come to the knowledge of the one true God. Paul makes these connections himself in Galatians chapter 4, when he uses the imagery of the barren childless one from Isaiah 54 as an allegory for the freedom found in the renewed covenant in the blood of Messiah. Galatians is often interpreted in many strange ways, so I always have to give my warning if I'm ever going to talk about Galatians. And this text in particular, in Galatians chapter 4, it's usually used to justify supersessionism and replacement theology. The idea that Christianity has replaced Judaism, but this is an incorrect understanding of the text. Paul clearly calls this an allegory. It's an allegory, which means he's using imagery found in previous texts to make a point in his current times. It's not the literal meaning of the text. And as my professor always says, we do well not to base doctrine on allegory. All right, so there's my warning. That's my little caveat. In this allegory, Paul makes a contrast between the free Jerusalem, which is the heavenly model of Jerusalem, and the enslaved Jerusalem here on earth. Remember that the tabernacle was made based on the heavenly model of Jerusalem. Remember that. The Torah of the altar and the furnishings and all of the priesthood and all that stuff are based on the pattern in heaven, which God showed to Moses. So while Paul mentions the covenant at Sinai, for the purposes of his allegory, he calls her Hagar, who is a slave. He's looking at the Jerusalem of his day to make a point. Jerusalem in Paul's day was indeed enslaved. She was not free. Rome held her captive in Rome's harem of cities, which it had conquered. The priestly leadership of the temple were actually Rome's toadies. They did whatever Rome wanted. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was not assigned by heredity the way it was supposed to be. It was assigned by Roman authority. Whoever made the best bribe or promised to uphold the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was given the high priest's job. And they hid their wickedness behind the commandments of the Torah for the high priest and the authority that goes along with it. But they were illegitimate priests who were definitely not living up to the Torah. And their authority then enslaved the people who were beholden to their actions and rulings. The leadership of the Sanhedrin at the time that Paul wrote Galatians also had to keep political concerns of Rome in the forefront. For this reason, Paul declares in Galatians, the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery along with her children. That's what that means. It's not a general condemnation of Judaism, only of the illegitimacy of the leadership at the time. Rome's toady priests. The contrast then, he says in verse 26, but the Jerusalem above, that is the heavenly Jerusalem, the Jerusalem on which the pattern of the tabernacle and the temple was made. The Jerusalem above is free. She is what? It says in verse 26, she is our mother. You see how he has beautifully woven together Isaiah's imagery of the mother Jerusalem in his ideal? That those who follow Yeshua are in his eternal covenant of peace, which Isaiah spoke of. And so he quotes directly from our Haftorah today in Galatians. He says, for it is written, this is verse 427, for it is written, rejoice, O barren woman who bears no children. Break forth and shout, you who suffer no labor pains. For more are the children of the desolate than the one who has a husband. In this allegory, we now see that Rav Shaul, St. Paul, is saying that it is through Yeshua's covenant renewal that the cloths of the tent will need to be expanded. She is our mother, and it is the Messiah who will accomplish this restoration of Israel on the land. And the work of Messiah is our guilt offering, as described in Isaiah 53:10. That guilt offering accomplishes the restoration of our hearts by the removal of sin which makes us worthy citizens in the kingdom of God. That is the essential prerequisite for entrance into this covenant of shalom, is the removal of sin and guilt. Her children of forgiven of sin, her tent can now expand, her pegs can be driven firm, and this covenant of shalom is extended beyond the borders of physical Israel to all the families of the earth through the blood of the covenant in Yeshua. This makes Jerusalem our mother. If you're following through this thread that I'm pulling, this makes Jerusalem our mother. Psalm 87 actually says this. I'll leave you with these words. But of Zion it will be said, this one and that one were born in her, and Elyon himself will establish her. Adonai will count the register of the peoples. This one was born there. Then singing and dancing, all my fountains of joy are in you. You see, this covenant centered there makes Jerusalem our mother. And who did we say Jerusalem reminds us of? Sarah. And Sarah is the wife of Abraham, and we're talking about the Abrahamic covenant finally being fulfilled, where Israel is on the land and growing, and all the nations of the earth have come to faith and are found then in the blessing of this precious eternal covenant of shalom. Amen.